Hello, good morning / afternoon / evening. This is UK Genealogy and welcome to my beginner's guide to the census. This video is the first in our census season, and we're starting, for those of you who have no idea what the census is, and this is literally a video going through an introduction to the census, so what it is, the information it contains, how that changes over time, and how you can start to use it. So this really is just a nice little introduction to ease you in. So the census, conducted every 10 years in the UK since 1801. In this video we're focusing on England, Wales and Scotland. I'll do a video on Ireland later on. The surviving census returns since 1841 are invaluable to us as genealogists because they're the first one that actually names our ancestors and provides details on their lives that can branch out our research into so many different directions. So it's on the census that you'll find things like occupation, but we'll go into that in just a moment. The census obviously carries on to this day, and there is one due in 2021. The census was originally intended to give the government detailed information on its population, which in more recent years has been vital in providing key welfare services such as health and education. For example, knowing that a certain area has seen an increase in children of primary school age suggests that a new or expanded secondary school is required in the area. So it's really about knowing where your demographics are and ensuring that your services match that. So that's what the data is used for in more recent years. Now, I've mentioned this before, but often just because a record was made for one purpose, it doesn't mean it can't be used for another. So obviously us as genealogists are using it for a completely different purpose, and yet it's still invaluable. So it's funny that information once provided to be analysed to identify demographics is now used by the descendants of those communities to learn about their lives. The census is amazing because it just gives you a snapshot of, for each ancestor, it gives you a snapshot into their home every 10 years. We learn who their neighbours were. We start to learn about what their living conditions were like by taking our research further, and we'll do that. We'll look at that in subsequent videos. We're looking at what they did for a living and even how educated they were. So it really gives a perfect time capsule of that moment every 10 years. And if your ancestor was born in 1837 and lived to the age of 90, you've pretty much got a snapshot of every 10 years of their life from the age of 4 all the way through to coming up the 1921 census. So it's quite extraordinary that we have that resource available. So there were censuses in 1801, 1811, 21 and 31. However, the earliest census to survive, for where we have not just the statistics but actually enumerators returns which cover the street with the names on, is 1841. It's not until 1911 that we actually get the original forms that our ancestors filled in, but from 41 onwards we at least have the enumerators copy where they copy down that key information. So 1841 is the most basic one in terms of the information that we get. So we get the first name and surname of each person living in the household, and we get their age up to the age of 15, and then once they passed anyone who's over 15, their age is rounded to the nearest 5 years. We get their sex, we get their occupation, and it also asks were they born in the county of current residence, and that's a yes or no answer. So if it was the census were taken in Essex, yes or no, were you born in this county? If no, it then asks you were you born in Scotland, Ireland or foreign parts, and that's indicated on the form as well. If they were born in England but just a different county, they'll just say no to the first question, but they won't actually tell you where they were born. That can be particularly tricky where you have ancestors living on a border, because it can be tricky knowing exactly. If it's just one border, it's likely they're in the next county along. If it's several counties bordering together, then that's where you might struggle a little. From 1851 to 1881, we get similar information. We get for each household, we get the house name or number, and often the street as well. We get the full name of each individual in the house, including middle names or initials if applicable. The head of household is usually the father of the main family. So even if a granddad or a father-in-law is living with them, it's usually the father of the main family living there who's the head of household, and then you get the relationship of each other person in that household to him, so either wife or child. If you find the husband's passed away, often the head of household will then be the widow, so it'll then be her granddaughter or son or brother or father-in-law, and that tends to be how that works. So it gives you an idea of how everyone is connected. We get their marital status, we get their age and their sex again, as with the last census, only this time now it is an accurate age for everyone, or at least accurate to what they say when they are asked to give their age. We get their occupation. This time we get their parish of birth. The county is also given, however be aware the boundaries do change over time, so just be wary that it might not be, so say you're looking for, you're told it's in this parish, in this county, and you think, oh great, this website has got those counties' baptisms. Just be aware that if boundaries have changed over time, then that archive might not necessarily have access to those records anymore, and you might need to go to the new county collection. If they were born overseas, then only the country of birth is provided. It asks for medical information. Are they blind? Are they deaf or dumb? And then in 1871 and 1881 censuses, it starts to ask, and obviously this is terminology of the time, whether you're an imbecile or an idiot or a lunatic. So that kind of gives you an idea of the kind of world they were living in terms of the perception of certain health conditions, but it also gives you information about the health of your ancestors as well, and gives you some leads about where your research might need to take you next to learn more about their life and perhaps how they overcame, or indeed how they how such challenges came upon them. Was there a tragedy in the family that triggered them to suffer in a certain way, and how did they overcome it, or indeed did they manage to overcome that as well. 1851 is the first census where we have returns for institutions such as workhouses, barracks, hospitals. However, I found barracks in the 1841 census, so just be aware that this is the first where it's kind of universal. It's not, you may find exceptions earlier on. However, this is only for barracks on home soil, so you won't find overseas records. 1861 is the first year for which schedules survive for vessels, although they were recorded I think in 51. It's not until 61 that we actually have those records surviving, but none survive for the vessels overseas in 1891, so just be wary of that. In 1891 the form was the same as 1881, with the exception that it now asks whether an individual is employed, or neither employer nor employed. So it gives you an idea about their situation. Are they running a shop where they're self-employed? Are they running the business? Are they higher up in the place where they work? Are they the person employing, or are they simply being employed? So that's some interesting information that kind of takes your ancestors to the next level around this period of time. It also asks you at this point how many rooms are occupied in the house if less than 5. So that's a really interesting social question about the kind of conditions that your ancestors were living in. And in Wales for the first time we start to be asked what language the people living in that home are speaking. By 1901 we've got the 1891 form, which has been further adapted, and now taking that employment information forward, we're now being specifically asked if one works as an employer or a worker of their own account. And it is also asked if you work from home, so again it's getting more detailed, that information that they're requesting. And the language spoken field has now been added for the Isle of Man as well as for Wales. 1911 is the first census, as I said earlier, for which the household schedules filled in by our own ancestors and signed, that's really wonderful to see their signatures, are available, as well as the enumerated books. This is for England and Wales only, but not for Scotland. Married women or widowed men are asked how many children they have had, as well as how many still live and how many have passed away. So in the sort of the main marriage of focus, if they're married, how many years married it asks, and it also asks of this marriage how many children have been born, how many have died, which is a really interesting, again, a social question, because you realise how many of their children, our ancestors, lost during the sort of late 19th century. Regarding occupation, the industry in which they're employed is now given on the form. When looking at place of birth, it's given by parish and county. If you live in the UK and Ireland, if you're born elsewhere, they're looking for the state or province of the country in which you were born. For those born anywhere though other than England and Wales, it is requested whether they are a resident or a visitor to the country, and nationality is also given. As with O1, the number of rooms in a house is asked, including the kitchen, but not including rooms such as scullery or bathrooms. So it kind of gives you an idea of what sort of those larger rooms, how many of those larger rooms your ancestors inhabited in their home. You may find that you have several families living in the home with them. And this is the first census to record the names of the British Army overseas, and vitally as well as their families. The 1921 census is coming up soon. It'll be available from Find My Past from January 2022. It'll be searchable for free from a free Find My Past account. However, images you'll have to pay to view the transcript of all the images from Find My Past, or they will be freely viewable, I understand, if you access the website from the National Archives computers. So you can search for a friend and access the images from the computer at the National Archives, whereas from home you will have to pay to view those images. Marriage is recorded for the over 15s when these records come out, and it's disclosed whether they are single, married, widowed, or for the first time whether they are divorced. Orphanhood for the first time is recorded for all under 15s. It asks whether both parents are dead or just one, and it asks which one has passed away, is your mother or your father, which is really interesting looking at the Great War, which finished only 3 years earlier. So how many orphans can we find from men who lost their lives in the Great War? It asks how many children or stepchildren under the age of 16 are they responsible for. It asks for place of birth and nationality if you're born overseas. It asks whether you're in whole or part-time education, and this is really, really interesting. That includes adults in education for the first time as well, perhaps adults at night school trying to further themselves. Occupation is given, and for those employed, rather self-employed, the name and type of employer, or the last employer if unemployed, is given, as well as employer's address or place of work. So if there are records relating to that company at the relevant archive, you may find all sorts of extra records which we're going to look into in future videos. Unfortunately, the length of the marriage and the details of children born and died within a marriage is no longer asked as it was in the 1911 census. For those in institutions or prisons, or those serving on merchant vessels in the armed forces, there is information that's more relevant to their situation that's requested of them. So there's extra fields of information that you'll get from ancestors in that situation as well. For looking at further census records, if you want to expand, looking pre-1841, so first of all, notably the 1798 land tax redemption records, they're kind of almost a census substitute for much of the adult male population of the time. That can be searched a website such as ancestry.com, and that's kind of a sort of a census. It's not a census, it doesn't cover the whole population, but it's quite a good record, and you're likely to find some ancestors in there. And it gives you a basic idea of kind of the rates they were paying and the kind of house that they would have been living in. If you're looking for pre-1841 censuses, there's a link there. It'll be on the relevant blog post down below in the description as well. But this link will take you to all the different pre-1841 censuses that do exist out there. So there are areas of Kent, for example, where the actual returns for pre-1841 censuses do exist. So the 1821 census does exist for certain households in certain parts of the country. So this link should give you a rundown of what material is out there. Sometimes there were local censuses dating right back to the sort of 1600s and beyond. So do look at that link and see if there's any that might be relevant to you in your research. Unfortunately, after the 1921 census, we find that the 1931 census was destroyed in a fire in 1942. So unfortunately, even when after 100 years when that's opened, there's nothing to open because it got destroyed in a fire due to the Blitz. No census was taken in 1941 due to the war. However, in my great-granddad's service record, it does mention a 1941 census, which potentially there was a census of the men, but that's not the same as what we're looking at here. In the meantime, Find My Past have created a great collection, which is electoral rolls from 1920 to 1932, which is a great substitute for the 1931 census. All it gives you is who lives there, who is eligible to vote in that household, and the address. But it at least gives you an idea of where they were at that period in time. And because it's living memory as well, you might find people who can give you a bit more information if you're missing out. As a sort of substitute for the 1941 census, there was the 1939 register. It was a survey, not a census, and it was made of the population on the eve of the Second World War. It later became the NHS register. As it was not a census, it could be opened after just 75 years, though living individuals are censored. It was edited after the time of writing, so it may contain a lady's surname before as well as after marriage and any subsequent marriages, so it may have extra surnames added around it and extra military information as well for men who may be served, and indeed women who contributed to the war effort. There are extra fields there which there's like a notes column that may contain additional information about contribution to the war effort, so it's quite an interesting document. It's more limited because it's not a census. It contains the name, address, sex. For the first time it's the exact date of birth rather than the age. It includes marital status, whether you're married, widowed, divorced, and personal occupation. So that's kind of, it's a substitute. So interesting, when we're in a position where come 2022 we'll have all the censuses from 41 to 21 plus the electoral rolls as a substitute for 31 and the 39 register as a substitute for 41. So we'll pretty much have all the material up to 1941 that we need. Missing records. There are entries in the census that are unfortunately missing. I mentioned earlier about certain institutions and the military that are missing. So if you've got an ancestor who's missing, it could be because they're in a place that wasn't recorded at that point in time, or as I've said, there's certain institutions that have been destroyed or lost and we don't have those records anymore. There are also certain areas which might be missing certain pages. There might be damage to the page as well, so you may need to research different areas of the country and learn about the status of their census records. I know there's been some great projects done to kind of scan some of the waterlogged images with infrared and to try and claim back some of the information that's been lost from those. In terms of accessing the census for Scotland is a separate collection to the census for England and Wales. Both collections can, however, be searched at ancestry.co.uk and findmypast.co.uk for a cost. However, you will only be able to access images and the additional information that they contain for England and Wales. Scottish images can only be seen at scotlandspeople.gov.uk. Many local libraries, archives and family history societies, and indeed the National Archives, offer free access to ancestry.co.uk and to Find My Past, so it may be that you can access those census collections for free at a local library, so do your research and see what's out there for you. The 1881 census is searchable for free with a comprehensive transcription at familysearch.org. All you need for that is a free account. However, you won't be able to view the original images. Family Search also has transcripts for the other censuses, but again, if you can't see the image, there's additional information that you may miss out on, which isn't always recorded. I know with Find My Past you can search by address as well, if you're struggling to find an ancestor, or indeed if you want to research the history of your house. Free Cen is a volunteer-based project to transcribe the various census records. I've included a link here that will be in the blog, which takes you to their current coverage of which areas they've transcribed and how far. Local history societies may offer free lookups for relatives who feature in the census. And here's a little appendix that you'll find in the blog as well, which gives you some of the common terms you might find in the census, and it explains to you what they mean. Census season will continue with other videos about how you can take the information that you find in the census and use that to take your research into exciting new directions. So don't forget to read the blog to get all that information that you may be overwhelmed by from watching this video, and don't forget to subscribe to catch up with those additional pieces of information that I will be sharing in the coming weeks. Bye for now.